Thank you, Javi. Shukran. Welcome, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be sharing with you what I'm calling the challenges of executing strategy in today's turbulent business market. Shukran to Javi for the kind introduction. Just to add a little bit on to the introduction, the company I founded and run is called Bridges, and we specialize in only one thing, which is the implementation of strategy. And I founded the company back in 2000 after leaving Citigroup, where I was regional VP for Asia Pacific. And during that time, I also worked in the Middle East. And for the last 17 years, this is my passion. I loved banking, but this is what I truly love. And it's a delight to share with you today what's happening in today's turbulent markets, in how companies are executing strategy. We work with organizations around the world on 5 different continents. I've been working in the Gulf and around the Middle East since 1999. And there are many different things going on that's going to be a pleasure to share with you and show you what's happening. Just to kick off, a question to warm us up into the subject is, what percentage of strategy implementations fail? So if you just think about a second on your own, what percentage of strategies are failing to be implemented? So we know that organizations come together, they pool the top minds in the company, they plan, they look at the financial projections, the market analysis, they study what the opportunities are, how to compete against the competition. After they've done all that hard work, what we found is that 2/3 of implementations are failing. But this is in fact good news, because when I first started Bridges back in 2000 and I was looking for research, I couldn't find any in how many implementations fail. So we started doing our own, and we discovered then that 90% were failing. So the good news is it's only 67% today. The bad news, of course, is that 2/3 of the time, after all that hard planning, the time, the people involved, the commitment, we're not seeing the results. And in Bridges, we put the pass rate at 50%. In other words, we ask you, what are your objectives, and have you achieved at least 50% of them in the time allocated? And 2/3 of companies are failing. So this 2/3 failure rate is something that has to be addressed today, because in today's turbulent markets, companies are implementing more frequently than any other time in history. And if we look at the chart, you can see there's a positive trend that is also the same reflection as some of our other peers in the market. You can see in 2002, when Bridges first published, it was 90. And then the positive trend where 2016, which was our latest research, it was down to 67%. So some key messages. Only when a strategy is successfully executed do you know if it was a good strategy. No leadership team walks into the boardroom and says, let's come up with a bad strategy. Everyone thinks it's good. But only when you start to execute it do you know how good it is. And only when it's well executed do customers notice the difference. Customers don't notice your strategy, they notice your implementation. And this is one of the reasons why in turbulent markets, it's so critical to get the implementation right. Also, we find many C-suite are under pressure by the board, who say, approve the strategy, and then say, make sure you execute it right the first time. Because only when the execution succeeds does it positively impact the shareholder value. So this afternoon, what I'd like to cover is 4 main learning outcomes. The first one, which I've teased into, is the impact on shortening life cycles on both companies and their strategies. The second is, what does it take to achieve excellence in execution? And I'm going to share with you the 3 broad themes from our research and client work. Then we're going to discuss how to engage your people in executing strategy, and I'm going to give you some quick tips around that area. And finally, to close out, how many strategy objectives should a company address every 12 months? Number 1, so what is the impact of shortening life cycles on both companies and strategies? What I mean by that is companies have a shortened life cycle, as do the strategies inside the company. And here's something that is ironic. Organizations are built to be stable, but they must keep changing. It's ironic. They're built to be stable in today's world at a time when they must be more agile and more adjustable than any other time. And this conflict is causing a lot of issues within companies. We all know the Kodak story, how Kodak went out of business because they buried digital photography because they didn't want to lose the revenue from film. More importantly, what do we learn from it for your organization to make sure, for one, it doesn't happen to you, and secondly, to make sure you're agile and moving forward? So if Kodak had been open, they would have easily moved into the new market. In your organization, what is out there in the future that you're maybe reluctant to move to, that if you don't, could be damaging to the business? Because here's the threat, and this is stunning. The average tenure of a company on the Standard & Poor's Index in the 1950s, the average company was 67 years. Today, it's just 17 years. The life cycle of a company has shrunk by 50 years. And this is not just on the S&P. 52% of the Fortune 500 firms since 2000 are gone. Now, that doesn't mean that they've gone out of business. Some have been acquired, some have been merged. But 52% of the companies in the year 2000 are now, from the year 2000, are now gone. It's consistent also with Fortune's magazine. The average life on a Fortune 500 company is just 14 years. You can see the trend. Companies are lasting for shorter times. And this has a major impact on companies and their strategy. In fact, there are 4 main impacts that I'd like to share with you. The first one, because companies are lasting dramatically less time, 50 years less, leaders must create new strategies more frequently than ever before. Some of us may remember when we used to set strategy for maybe 8, 10, or 12 years. Today, what is the life of an average strategy? 3 to 5 years. And consider that the average tenure of a CEO is only 6 years. In other words, most CEOs have 1, if they're lucky, 2 bites at getting the strategy and the implementation right. So leaders must create new strategies more frequently than ever before. And number 2, because they have to create strategy more frequently, by default, they have to implement more frequently. And the word implementation and execution are synonymous, so I use both interchangeably. Leaders today have to implement more frequently. The fastest growing area of Bridges, my consultancy, is helping internally leaders understand, first of all, what implementation is all about, and then secondly, the framework in what it takes to achieve their success. The third key point, we're suffering from change fatigue. Many organizations say to me, Robin, my team's burned out, they're tired, they're weary, they're suffering fatigue. What can we do? The answer, the solution, get comfortable with it. It's not going to change. It's going to become more dramatic as more changes in our turbulent markets today happen because of the influence of augmented reality, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, digital transformations, internet impact on culture. There's so much happening today. There's no solution to change fatigue. And if they're not comfortable, then you have to find the workforce who can manage it. And number 4, what is the impact of these shortening life cycles? You have to abandon yesterday. You can no longer assume that yesterday's results will deliver tomorrow's performance. Because we are moving so quickly, products are becoming less their life cycle. Strategies are becoming shorter, and that means companies must let go of assuming that just because last year was successful, so will be next year. So the second part of what I'd like to cover is what does it then take to achieve excellence in execution? And Jaffe's only given me about 40 minutes, so I'm just going to give you the highlights as I can't share everything. But from a broad perspective, so first of all, what is the number one reason strategy implementation fails? Now, I've been researching and studying this topic for many, many years. And over that time, I see on the internet many surveys and blogs and articles written saying, this is the reason implementation fails. We do the research every few years, and the number one reason has been in the top 5 for the reason it fails over the whole 17 years of our research. And in 2016, even I was surprised to see the number one reason why it fails is poor communication. Why was I surprised? Because leaders know they have to communicate right. They know they have to communicate throughout the whole implementation, but they don't. And it's still a major issue in the implementation. It's the top reason currently that implementations are failing. So over the last 3-4 years, I was researching for my new book, which is called Excellence in Execution, How to Implement Your Strategy. And we went back to doing our research. We did case studies on Singapore's biggest bank, DBS, on Singapore Airlines, on Amazon, among other companies. And we saw a trend through our research. We were able to extract a pattern. And that pattern was 3 broad themes that help and guide successful organizations to execute their strategy. And what I'm going to share with you is what these 3 broad themes are. The first one is create awareness. Nothing I'm about to share with you is rocket science, it's common sense. But just because it's common sense doesn't mean it's common practice. Let me explain. The first broad theme under create awareness has 2 major components: communication and engagement. Consider 95% of employees cannot describe their own company strategy. I just think about that for a moment. If people don't know the company strategy, how can they execute it? So again, the number one reason why we fail, poor communication. We know it's important, but we're not doing it. Leaders have to nurture the communication, not just do a town hall meeting, send out some emails, put some posters up. That's just the teaser. Throughout the whole implementation, they must continually share best practices, update against the strategic objectives, feedback on what's working, what's not, input from customers from different parts of the business. There's this whole wealth of information and communication that companies just don't do. The second main part is engagement. If you study engagement levels around the world today, they're terrible, they're horrendous. Employees are not engaged in their organization. And when you launch a new strategy, what does a new strategy mean to employees, to the workforce? 2 words. It means more work. If they're not engaged, why would they take on more work? And why is more work? Because they have to still do the current way before they transform to the new way of working. So we have a major issue today about getting employees engaged in the work that we are doing. The second key theme, build excellence. This has 5 subcomponents that have to come together. You have to develop a culture of excellence. In organizations that have this, they have, for example, alignment in the way they're working to the organization culture. Why? Because they understand that your culture drives your implementation. I'll say that one again. Your culture drives the way your company implements. 2 companies can have the same strategy, but how they achieve it depends on their culture. A culture of excellence also involves holding people accountable, making sure that when you ask them to do something, they know you're going to follow up, and reward them when they get it done and punish them when it's not done if required. So you have to have accountability, alignment to the culture, and in today's world, as I've just shown you, because of the speed of which we're moving, you have to be agile. And I call this the triple A, the alignment, the accountability, and agility. Second component, organizations today have to be sustainable through business model disruption, which is a paradox. You have to sustain, and at the same time, you have to be disrupting. But this is the balance that we have to find. So many organizations are going through this today with the increase in innovation and digitalization, and they have to relook at their business model. The most obvious example are banks, where, for example, in the consumer world, 50% of transactional banking will vanish for banks as things like Alipay and Apple and other versions take over how they can do transactions. So your company must be open to business model disruption and new ways of working. Constant communication appears again because we're so bad at it. Most organizations, 6 months after the launch of the strategy, what are they talking about? Operations, day-to-day problems, turnover, customer issues, product issues. What are they not talking about? Implementation of the strategy. So leaders have to keep talking about it to keep it focused. So constant communication. The next is change your measures. And oh, I bury my head. It's unbelievable how many organizations I go to who show me their strategy and have not changed their measures to track the new strategy. So a simple reminder, simple tip, change your strategy, change your measures. Once you identify your new strategy objectives, every objective must have a measure so you know how you're doing. How do you know if your strategy is performing? How do you know if your strategy is good or bad? Only when you have the right measures in place. And the final block under Build Excellence is synergize the work. You have to empower people to change the way they're working. Why empower them? Because with all respect to leaders, they don't know what's happening at the coalface between the customer and the business. It's the employees, the workforce every day who know what needs to happen. And they have to be empowered to make the changes. And one more quick tip under synergized work, one of my favorites, create a to-stop list. Everyone has a to-do list, but when you change your strategy, identify what work should be stopped. I was working with a bank in Doha, and they were changing their focus of the segment of customers that they wanted to attract. The marketing team were just about to launch a new credit card that targeted the old segment. The CEO personally got involved to say stop. Why? First of all, the credit card was attracting customers they no longer wanted. Second of all, it diluted the resources, the time and the energy away from what was most important around the new strategy. So you have to identify what's no longer of value and empower people to synergize their work and to stop doing things that are not of value. The third broad theme is follow through. And once again, I see this as such a weakness in companies. Companies put in play, they train their people for the new strategy. They communicate what's going on. They align their culture. They synergize their work. And then when people step up and take the right actions, what happens? Nothing. When people step up, you have to follow through. And this involves recognizing them for the work done. And it also involves leaders following up with their teams to make sure the work is being done. The number one best practice of top performing CEOs is follow through. When we study what high performing leaders do, they follow up from one meeting to the next. They check on their teams and their people to make sure that what they've agreed is getting done. And excellence in execution is not just about holding people accountable, but following up with them to also support them, see what help they need, allocate resources when required, and following through to make sure the right actions are being taken. So typically in many companies, we see implementation or execution is very unstructured. It's many activities going on, but with no common theme or structure. The three broad themes, create awareness, build excellence, and follow through, give you a structured execution that translates your strategy, what I call it 50,000 feet, so your high-level strategy, down to the ground. So these three broad themes help you understand what it's going to take to go from 50,000 feet to the ground level, and for what right actions your people need to take to implement your strategy. So of the 3 out of 4 things I'd like to cover in this webinar, the third is, once you understand that we're moving faster than any other time in history, you've started to consider the 3 broad themes about how we create awareness, build excellence, and continuously follow through. The third area is, how do you engage your people in executing strategy? I've already shared that engagement levels in different countries are something to be concerned about. So in this webinar, I'd just like to share with you a couple of tips that we do with our clients to help them engaged. The first one is to consider, when you're rolling out your strategy, well, think about it this way. In advertising, it's all about share of market. In banking, it's share of wallet. In online advertising, it's share of voice. In execution, it's share of mind. You have to take the strategy and you have to embed it into people's mind so they're conscious of it, they know it, they contribute to it. Remember, 95% of employees in companies don't even know what their own company strategy is. So how do you get share of mind? Well, I'd like to share a metaphor with you that we use in companies. On the left-hand side is the current thinking. On the right-hand side of the wall is the new thinking. Leaders see the future. They see nirvana, the promised land, where they're heading to. What do the employees see? The wall. It's a leader's role to take his team, to take the company up over the ladder, over the wall, to the future. The first step on the ladder is to get share of mind. How do we do this? It involves using visuals and telling people about what's involved. So why do I say using visuals? Here's one of our favorite tips that we work with organizations. When you're launching a new strategy in your company, brand it. Use branding just like you would do for an external campaign. Branding will show the people in the company what the strategy is using images. And this helps them understand. Okay. So the journey over the wall, one of the first things is to share of mind. A couple of other quick tips to share with you is you also have to tell them what to do. Many of you have heard the term WIFM, what's in it for me? So when they think about the new strategy, they wonder how they're going to be involved or what's in it for them. You also need to explain the WEX FM. What does that stand for? You have to let your people know what's expected from them. What do they have to do different? If your strategy is around digitalization, do they have to then adopt new platforms for working? Do they have to start using algorithms or adopting augmented reality or artificial intelligence into their work? If your strategy is around customer service, do the people need to look at their touch points, examine the positive and negative ways they're serving around the touch points? Or if you're using process redesign, something like Lean Six Sigma, do your people have to get involved in process redesigns? You have to explain to your people what it means. And while you're doing that, you have to inspire them. With people not engaged and not understanding the strategy, a leader's critical role to achieve excellence execution is to inspire their people what to do. And one more bonus tip. When you're inspiring and sharing within the strategy, when you communicate upwards, share facts. When you communicate downwards, share more stories. So this again is a powerful tip that we use. For example, when you're sharing the new strategy with your board to get approval, you're telling more facts. You're using data to explain your arguments, to support them. But when you take the strategy to the employees and to the front line, you're using less facts and more stories, more emotional experience. So a quick tip, when communicating upwards, facts, more facts. When you're communicating downwards, more stories. And this takes me to the fourth and last area, which is when you're achieving excellence in execution, should you do more or less? And the answer to this is less is more. So please allow me and I'll explain what I mean, because this again is a very powerful tip. When organizations launch their new strategy, there's so much to do. We have to train our people. We have to communicate to them the new changes, explain why the organization is transforming, start to look at our measures, identify our processes and what needs to change, align with our culture. Wow, there's so much going on. Excuse me. But if you try and do everything at once, you will fail. So another powerful tip is that less is more. When people have too much to do, nothing gets done. It is therefore better to focus on fewer objectives than more. Let me explain the research behind it. This comes from social psychology a few years ago, and these are actual pictures of the experiment. Two ladies went into their local supermarket, and in the first week, they displayed 24 different jams. In the second week, they displayed just 6 jams. And I have three questions for you. Question number 1. Which attracted more people, the 24 or the 6? Well, when I ask this to an audience, many say the 6, but in fact, the 24 attracted more people. Which sold more, the 24 or the 6 jams? The 6 sold more. And my third question is, how much more? 1 times, 2 times, 4 times? In fact, 10 times more sales. What? You might be asking yourself, what's happening? So let me explain. With the 24 varieties, more traffic was attracted to look at the jams, but you can see in the basket that very few people purchased. When only 6 jams were on offer, it attracted less people, but tremendous 10 times increase in sales. And this experiment has been repeated now for different products with the same consistent response. So what is the neuroscience? What is the research behind it? Well, you're probably familiar with the term. There comes a point where people are just paralyzed by analysis. They're like, overwhelmed by too many choices. And when that happens, they do nothing. So by offering less, it's easier for people to make a choice. And I have to explain, there is an exception to the rule. Many, if you're, many ladies, for shoes, there's no such thing as less is more. Or for, if you're like my wife, there's no such thing as less handbags. So a question to consider. When less is more, how many strategy objectives should you focus on each year? So think about it for a second. You have multiple things to do to achieve your strategy, but how many objectives should you focus on within 12 months, within a year? If you focus on 3, how many do you think you achieve? Well, you do in fact achieve 3. If you focus on 4 to 10, how many are achieved? 1 or 2. And if you focus on 11 to 20, none are achieved. Why not? Because the organization is overstretched. It doesn't know what's important. Resources aren't focused, so they're trying to be allocated everywhere. People don't know what's most important because there's too much going on. In contrast, when you focus just on 3 objectives, you're able to allocate the right resources, explain to people what's most important with clarity, hold them accountable for taking the right actions, follow through, and you achieve your performance. So we found in the clients we work with that the magic number is 3 to 5. So for example, earlier this year, we were supporting an agricultural company working globally, but based headquarters out of Thailand. And the CEO had 17 different objectives to achieve the strategy within the next 5 years. We then identified the top 5 most important strategies for 2007, the most important objectives for 2017. And we then made sure that the allocation of resources, support, time, investment were given. The other objectives were kept on the radar, but this is where our energy was put. And the company is successfully growing and expanding as it implements the new strategy. So this takes me to the last part of my presentation. And I'm going to end it towards the end with just a puzzle. And the puzzle is going to explain what is the core of excellence in execution. And the puzzle goes like this. 5 birds sit on a fence. 3 decide to leave. How many birds are left on the fence? Once more. 5 birds sit on a fence. 3 decide to leave. How many birds are left on the fence? Well, if I was in the room with you, I'd hear some people saying none, 2, 5. How many are left on the fence? 5. Why? They attended a wonderful webinar on how to get to the other side of the fence. They even had a conference call on the first Sunday of every month to discuss what to do to get to the other side of the fence. But what haven't they done? Taken the right action. Now, why do I say taken the right action? First of all, taking something, to do something, requires discipline. To achieve excellence in execution in our turbulent times, you have to have the discipline. Similar in human behavior, if you want to run a marathon, you have to have the discipline to run the kilometers or miles, eat the right foods, and do anaerobic and aerobic exercise. In business, we have to have the discipline to create awareness, build excellence, and follow through. The right actions is because we're busy every day, but are the actions we're taking contributing towards the new strategy? So you have to make sure it's the right actions. So just to close out, if anyone would like more information, we host the only portal dedicated to strategy implementation in the world, which is called the Implementation Hub, which is at implementation-hub.com. And this has almost 600 videos, case studies, interviews, articles, PowerPoints, multimedias that you can download and support yourself if you're looking for more. And just recently, a few months ago now, I launched my new book, which is my fourth in the series on strategy implementation, called Excellence in Execution: How to Implement Your Strategy, which Piyush Gupta, the CEO of DBS Bank, was kind enough to write the foreword. And the website, you can find the videos, the book. The book goes into detail, not what implementation is about or execution, but how do you do it. And there's videos, cases, materials, tools you can download that it's all available for free as part of the book. So I'd like to thank the team for the invitation. And at that point, I believe, wow, how's that? Excellence in execution is all about the details, so we're 40 minutes exactly. And I'll hand back to our host, Jeffy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Spicklund, for a very, very intriguing presentation. Folks, we are now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions, you could either insert it in the question box, or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the console, so please click on it if you would like to speak directly with the speaker. But let me go to the question box. There are a couple of them already posted. What are the top reasons you think that strategy execution fails, Mr. Spicklund?
So the first one I explained during the presentation, the top reason is poor communication. So this is a concern, an issue with so many organizations. Leaders get excited, they talk about the strategy for the first few months, but within 6 months, the conversation is all about operations. And when leaders stop talking about the strategy, so do their people. The other key reasons in our research is, and nothing is going to shock you, it's just amazing, it's still happening, is poor measurement. Organizations don't have new measures or the right measures in place. And even when they do, they haven't got the discipline on how to use them and use them for decision making. And then a third top reason why I see implementation or execution failing so frequently is leaders underestimate the whole implementation challenge. What do I mean? Once leaders craft the strategy, some of them will almost like rub their hands together and go, okay, I've done the hard work. Implementation is easy. You go ahead and do it. And they walk away. Leaders have to guide and drive the implementation throughout the company. So they have, many of them, because they underestimate the challenge ahead, don't see their responsibilities and then don't conduct themselves the way they need to make sure it succeeds.
Thank you very much. We have another one. What approach has your company adopted to implement strategy in the past?
Are we referring to Bridges on that, my own company?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, we practice what we preach, which we really have to do for our, when our clients see us. So, we have the discipline very much in terms of doing follow through. We have weekly conference calls, either on Zoom or Skype, talking about how we're progressing, following through on key initiatives, making sure we're doing what we said we're doing. Then I'll share one bonus. And thank you for the question, whoever asked it. One thing I didn't share that we use a lot, and we do with our clients, is when you set actions, aim to achieve them within 90 days. Huh? Now, why 90 days? There's something magical When you set actions to do within 90 days, there's more chance of them getting done. First of all, consider, if you set an action to be achieved in 12 months, when do most people start working on it? Probably, like 10, 11 months into the year. And then they're like, oh, I got to get this done. But when you do an action to be achieved every 90 days, first of all, we all feel good when we tick the box and say that's done. Secondly, you create momentum and traction. So when we're working on a big project, we break it down into smaller chunks. People can see results. Success sells, theory promises. So they see the success starting to build. We're also able to allocate the resources to smaller actions and make sure they get done. And most importantly, from my point of view as a CEO, I'm able to track, and I'm not waiting a year to see if a project's happening or not, but every 90 days, I'm able to review overall performance. And then every week, I'm able to check on how the team is doing. So interesting question. Thank you to the person who asked it.
All right, thank you very much. And we have another one, short question. What would be your best tip to share on how to execute strategy?
Well, I've shared with you some various tips. What would be my best tip? Well, it goes back to the previous question of why implementation or execution fails, which is leaders underestimate the whole implementation challenge. So one of the best tips would be to make sure before you start to roll out that your leadership team have the knowledge, the understanding, and the tools to be able to implement the strategy. So it very much links to, giving them the ability. If we fail at something 2/3 of the time, then obviously there's a flaw in our approach. And one of the biggest problems is leaders keep repeating the same mistakes. So give them the material, give them the ability, give them the knowledge that will allow them to make better decisions so that implementation can then succeed.
All right, thank you very much. We have another one from from Saud Al Sairi. The question is, thank you for the valuable presentation. My question is, would you please tell us about disruptive strategy?
The short answer to that is I won't, because I'm not a digital or innovation specialist. I'm a strategy implementation specialist. So within my clients, some of them are adopting disruption. Just the other day, I was working with one of the main luxury goods companies that you'll all know, who, at this time are adopting into digital as so many other companies are. So on that basis, I'm not I don't specialize in implementing disruption. What I do is talk about, because today execution is so critical because so many companies are dealing with disruption. And for that, they have to be able to be more agile and to be able to manage it better. And the only subnote on that is different organizations have to manage disruption differently. Some need to be engaged yesterday, and they have to be looking at whatever that disruption is. Most likely it's around the digital platform. So for example, as I shared in the presentation, banks have to be adopting digital. It's not an option. And they're all rushing to get there yesterday. Whereas the industry I just mentioned that I was with for the last few days, in luxury products, there's not such a rush. They can get there in the next year or two. What's the difference? Many people are infringing into banks' business model, but the luxury goods market is very hard to enter in. So using Porter's 5 forces, there's a high barrier of entry. And secondly, luxury goods want to make sure they replicate the experience of walking into a store through their digital and internet experience. And they have the time and the luxury, excuse the pun, to be able to make that happen. So I hope that answers your question from about disruption.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another one from Ronald Macumbi. The question is, what does branding a strategy mean, and how do you do it? Can you share a few examples with us?
Yeah, it's with pleasure. I used it in the presentation. This was a methodology that in Bridges we use with just about all our clients when they're launching the strategy. Why? Because you can send a strategy out in words and it's very hard to understand. We know also that 95% of people don't know what the strategy is. When you use an internal brand, an image, it's a very powerful tool that greatly improves the communication. So let me give you an example. And my example will come from companies where the Non-Disclosure Act is no longer valid. So for example, I worked with Microsoft when they were globally rolling out their new strategy about 15 years ago. Bill Gates had stepped down, Ballmer had taken over. Like most new CEOs, he said, what do we need to do? What is our new strategy? He looked at Microsoft's 7 core businesses and he identified that most of them were under threat. You can look back now, you can see it. Their operating system was under threat from Apple. Their gaming was under threat from Sony. Their server business was under threat from Dell. So he launched a new strategy, which you can visit on their website today, called CPE. And CPE stands for Customer Partner Experience. And the way we launched this in Asia Pacific was through 3 teaser images. And the rationale, the logic is that people prefer to reach a conclusion on their own than just be told something. This comes from the work of David Sibbett. So we showed 3 images. One, and you can visualize it. One was an airplane flying into some clouds with saying, it looks like beautiful weather today, but there's turbulence just ahead. The second poster was a customer hanging on to the outside of a building, and the tagline was, or the copy, are we losing the grip on our customers? And the third poster was a guy, a businessman walking across a tightrope saying, it's taken us 25 years to get to the top, but it only takes a second to fall. These 3 images were sent out across Microsoft Asia Pacific in all the back offices of all the companies. And what happened was it created a groundswell of curiosity. We then launched the new strategy with an image, which was a rowing boat showing the alignment about CPE. And the outcome was we started the launch 7 months after head office. But within a few weeks, a few months, we'd overtaken head office, that Seattle was visiting Asia to find out how it was going so well. Why did it go so well? Because by doing the internal branding, giving an image to the strategy, using images to explain it and why we had to change, people understood it. And when they understood it, they were able to adopt it by taking the right actions.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one last question, a supplementary from Mr. Macumbi. The question is, companies that are globally spread, like KFC, how do they execute their strategies?
So the methodology I've shared with you is we work with large organizations and government bodies. So in the core of the presentation, about create awareness, build excellence, and follow through. That's the fundamental building blocks for executing your strategy. And I guess the other way I can recommend is pick up a copy of Excellence in Execution, How to Implement Your Strategy, because that's very much written for large organizations. I don't do work with startups and small businesses. So, the whole approach, how to do it is very different in a large organization. Why? Consider a startup. When the founder wants to make a change, he stands up in the middle of the room and says, okay, everybody move from left to right. But a CEO who's working across 36 different countries with multiple businesses, he needs a very different style, of course. And that's what we address. So if you have a look at the implementation hub, implementation-hub.com, or you have a look at excellence and execution, it will give you more information, which is, the heart of how large organizations working cross borders, different markets, different segments are able to implement or execute their strategy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Specklen, for a very, very excellent presentation, and that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. So any quick concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Yeah, I mean, many of us are now looking ahead into 2018, the challenges that are there. Let's remember the number one for high performing leaders, best practice is follow through. So if you're implementing or executing your strategy right now, stay engaged, talk to your people, follow through, nurture your communications, and then, just keep, focused and driving it forward. And first of all, thank you to everyone for participating on the webinar. And I wish you all the best with achieving excellence in execution as you plan and prepare to roll out 2018.
Well, thank you indeed for sharing this valuable information into our platform. So once again, I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for taking the time to deliver this webinar. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Robin Specklen. And
Shukran. Thank you.
Shukran, Habib. Thank you very much. And thank you all of those who attended the webinar. Please go to webinar.mile.org to access the recorded version and equally to learn about our upcoming programs. So with that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.